Hello everyone. Thank you very much for joining on this beautiful Analytics Tuesday. We're just going to get started, and before we actually jump into the content, I wanted to give you a quick feel for a few items that you need to be aware of. First of all, the webinar today is in a listen-only mode. However, we want to make sure that you are certainly able to ask questions and get answers from both of the presenters. And the way that you can do that is by taking advantage of the Q&A chat pod that you're seeing within your Adobe Connect. If we don't get to your question instantly, we will certainly be able to get to that question towards the end of the webinar. And if we do happen to run out of time, don't worry. We will be able to tie your question right back to your email address and respond directly to you. If it's a question that's worth answering in public, it's something also we can add into the community forum thread that was just created. The second item I want to call out is that this session is being recorded, and it'll be made available to everyone who registered. And it will also be available in our analytics forum, the community forum, as well as our YouTube channel. Finally, there is an exit poll after the webinar concludes. Please complete the exit poll questions in order to better strategize what our upcoming webinar content should be. So we really appreciate the feedback that you put there. So thank you, everyone. And with that, I'd like to kick things off. So like I said, happy Tuesday. It's an Analytics Tuesday here. I'm based in New York, and joining me, well, my name is Eric Matisoff, and at Adobe my role is as the Analytics and Data Science Evangelist. And sitting by my side virtually is Jaekob Chenina. Jaekob, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself to the folks that we have on the webinar here?
Yeah, my name is Jaekob Chenina. I'm a product manager for some of the machine learning and AI-related features that we built and that are continuing to build in Adobe Analytics. Also, this topic of data feeds and this user interface relates to that a lot, since being able to get that data is often the very, very first step in being able to do all kinds of exciting data science and machine learning analysis and analysis applications.
Fantastic. Thanks for joining me, Jaekob. And with that, let's jump in. So the first thing I want to call out is that in the Adobe Analytics community forums, we've actually just created a thread specifically for this topic. And the way to access it, as you can see in the screenshot here, is if you click the question mark when you're logged into the Adobe Experience Cloud, and then scroll on down to Community, you'll be taken to the link that I have listed there on the slide. And of course, if you have any additional follow-up questions or anything like that, the folks from Adobe that are in this webinar are happy to answer them and continue the conversation there. Moving right along, let's actually jump into the agenda. So what are we actually going to be talking about today? So at a high level, these are the 6 different items of focus for Jaekob and me today. First, we'll be walking through some advanced use cases for taking advantage of data feeds. We wanted to bring that right up front so that you can start thinking about how your business can start taking advantage of the data feed technology today. Next, we're going to be talking a little bit about what does the data processing order look like on the Adobe side? It's a question that we get a lot within the Adobe product and evangelism team is, well, how is data processed and at what point can I access it? Next, we'll be talking a little bit about how data feeds compares to live stream, as well as some other technologies that we have for getting data out of the platform. Then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about setting up the data feeds and an overview of the interface. And then finally, before walking through the demo, we're also going to just clue you into some additional tools that some of our most advanced and complex customers are taking advantage of in order to leverage the data that is being populated by these data feeds. So Let's jump into the advanced use cases. And for that, I'm actually going to hand the microphone on over to Jacob. Jacob, why don't you walk us through some of these use cases?
Absolutely. There is a tremendous value in being able to analyze all the data and all the reports that kind of come out of the box in the analytics user interface. That being said, there are many other reasons that you might want to get the raw data out of the product. The first one here to discuss is attribution. Within the analytics solution, we do have some first touch and some last touch attribution models, but many customers want to do something a little bit deeper than that. There's different models like J-shaped models and different machine learning attribution models. So that's one reason that you might want to get the data out. Another reason is for remarketing. Let's say you want to send an email to someone within a day or so of them creating an account or going through a process. Maybe they dropped out of the shopping cart. By using a data feed, you can track these events and then connect that with something like Adobe Campaign and send them emails to help move them along towards your business goals. Another reason that people get data out of Adobe Analytics is to do profiling. And very much related to profiling is building propensity scoring models. That's kind of the technical term for that. In a nutshell, if you have many thousands or millions of users on your website, if using a propensity scoring model, the machine learning models will learn to identify patterns in the behavior of people, and it'll be able to point you to the people that are most likely to purchase or engage with your product. So instead of sending out a mass email to every single person who's ever registered, you can limit the impact of an email campaign like that and just target the people that you think have the best quality. Also, clustering is another reason to get data out of the product. Clustering is another machine learning technique which helps you identify the common patterns and groupings among the people that are on your website. We've done some clustering internally of people that are using our website, which is Adobe Analytics, and it's really useful for being able to find out how many people fall into certain profiles or personas. For example, we have some people that are experienced, seasoned analysts that live and breathe the analytics user interface, and then there are other people that are a little bit more new, beginner type of personas, and clustering is a great way of identifying how many people fit into those general categories that you see in your website. Reprocessing is another reason that people get the data, use something like data feeds to get the data out of the tool. Perhaps someone accidentally tagged the website wrong in a way that makes it so that the credit card is getting tagged and shows up in analytics reports. Obviously, that's sensitive data that you don't want to be distributed widely. So using a data feed, you can apply some processing rules that puts it into a separate report suite that then removes that data, and then you can feed it back so that that data then gets cleansed. Those are just a couple of the common reasons that people use data feeds. And I'm going to hand it off to Eric here.
Great. Thanks, Jacob. So now that we've thought about a few different ways that customers today are already taking advantage of the data coming from data feeds, let's step back a little bit and kind of peek under the covers of how we're processing data on the Adobe end. So once, first of all, the page or the SDK or the API from the data insertion API is collecting data. The next step from there is we run what we call pre-processing, and you may already be familiar with these. These are where our processing rules are run, and then Vista rules are run, and then finally marketing channel rules are run. These three items together combine what we call pre-processing. And then, of course, whatever happens after pre-processing is just simply going to be processing. And so that's where we're applying the persistence of evars, and persistent attributes like evars. We're applying session attributes and metrics, as well as success attribution. So all of those take place in the processing areas. So when it comes to those two different halves of the coin for processing, we've got a few different locations and a few different times that data can be extracted regarding those different processing points. So first of all, we're going to layer on the concept of classifications across all three of these. And so those three things are going to be real-time reports. And you can see those come out in between pre-processing and processing. So you're going to have processing rules, Vista rules, and marketing channel rules applied when you're tapping into real-time reports and APIs, but you're not going to have access to persistent attributes and session attributes and success attribution. Now, if you move over from left to right, then you'll see Analytics Reports API and Data Warehouse. Both of those come into play after the pre-processing and processing takes place, and will also have access to your classifications. And then finally, you've got the data feeds all the way on the right, which is the focus for today's session as well. Now, keep in mind, I recognize that this is somewhat of a complicated slide. I'm actually kind of clicking through a little bit just so you can see some additional places that you can actually tap into this. And that's why I've kind of slowly built it out so you can get a feel for it. But don't worry, the most important thing to gather here is that there's a number of different ways you can tap into the data in order to extract it. Something else you may not be aware of is just to the left of real-time reports is this ability to take advantage of live stream, which is an additional product available within the Adobe Analytics product set. And you've got three different ways in which you can access that data, taking advantage of live stream raw data or live stream dashboards or live stream triggers. And this is where data is pumped directly. We call it live stream because it's almost like a fire hose of data that is exported directly out of the pre-processing funnel and accessible for you to take usage of and access as well. So from there, I actually think it makes sense to dig a little bit more deep into those different items of live stream, real-time, APIs, data warehouse, and data feeds. And for that, let me actually slide on over to Jacob to walk you through some of those different items.
Thank you. So live stream, just to recap here, we have the live stream and the real-time reports API. These are both ways to tap in the data into the raw hit data before the processing has completed. Real-time, and we're going to give a comparison of why you would use one versus the other. The live stream here is as Eric said, it's a fire hose of data. You can get up to 300 columns. And when you set this up, you're going to have your own servers for the data to land. And lots of this data, the data comes in within 30 to 90 seconds. And you can use this to build custom dashboards to see in near real time of the people how many people are on the website right now. And of those people that are on the website, how many of them came from a paid advertising channel. And this live stream gives you a lot of ability to customize those reports and answer really, really specific questions in near real time. So commonly this is used to build custom dashboards for people to do near real-time monitoring. And now Eric is going to give us a more detailed comparison of how this relates to the API.
Great. So as I mentioned, there's all those different ways to access data depending on where and when and how you're accessing it. And to be honest, this slide is impressively deep in terms of what's available. I would almost suggest maybe taking a screenshot of it and really digging into it later, but there's a few different things that I want to call out here. First of all, our 4 columns are going to be comparing live stream, which Jacob just walked us through, to data feeds, which is really the big focus of our call today and our webinar today, compared to the APIs, of which we have a few. From APIs, we have both the real-time APIs, where you're accessing data within just a few seconds of the activity taking place, as well as the post-processed APIs, where you're just simply accessing the same reporting data that would exist anywhere else within the platform. And then finally, data warehouse as well, which is another tool for exporting data sets. And there's a few different rows to keep in mind. First of all, around the data, how do you want to receive it? With live stream, you're actually receiving it on individual hits. So that's that concept of that fire hose of as data comes in, you're instantly getting access to it. Data feeds, as you're going to see shortly, are very large data files that are at an extremely event granularity, transactional granularity, really, really detailed. The API is going to present you with more aggregated data, similar to what you're used to seeing within an analysis workspace or report builder, etc. And then finally, data warehouse allows you to export large data files, but at a slightly more granular level than where you would have access to within the APIs. A few other things to take note of here are keeping in mind where the different processed areas are for each of these 4 different items. So the processed row may be of interest for you, as well as the way that these different data formats are delivered. So for example, within live stream, you're receiving a JSON export. So a JSON object is going to give you that data that you're looking for. Whereas within a data feed, as you'll see shortly, it actually is returned to you in a tab delimited file. APIs are similarly going to return JSON objects, and then a data warehouse file will be a CSV or a tab delimited file. So like I said, there's a lot of detail here. Feel free to take screenshots, ask more questions. In fact, what I'll do after this webinar is I'll actually post this table directly in our community forum thread so that you can reference it anytime you need to. So moving along from here, we are going to jump a little bit into actually what the overview and setup and the reasoning behind the data feed interface is. And for that, I'm going to pass it back on over to Jacob. Jacob, you may be on mute.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I was. In the product management team, we're always looking for new opportunities to improve the product and see what the challenges are and where we can empower the users to do things more quickly. And one way that we found that was happening is before we created data feed UI, analysts at the companies, they had to reach out to Adobe customer care, and by working with them, by submitting tickets or getting on the phone with them, they would then set up a data feed that would then drop at an FTP server or an S3 bucket. And we found that that was a little bit of a laborious process. And so the reason we created this data feed user interface is so that now you can get into, just from the analytics user interface, you can create your data feeds, manage them. If a feed fails or fails to deliver, you can monitor them and do pretty much everything you need to do with managing your data feed. You still have the option to reach out to client care if you're running into issues. That's definitely still an avenue. But many customers have really liked the data feed user interface because it gives them more control to manage things themselves. And I'll let you continue there, Eric.
Great. Yeah. So from that, we can walk a little bit through just at a high level what the 4 key steps are for setting up a data feed, and we'll do this just simply with some screenshots and then actually jump into the tool to show you what it looks like in real life. So first thing you're going to do is just simply find the tool, and that's going to be available under the admin section, looking for data feeds. And then from there, by the way, you will have to be an administrator of your Adobe Analytics implementation in order to access it. Then from there, you're just simply going to click Create New Feed in order to do exactly that, create a new feed. And then you can jump into all the different granular settings of deciding what who gets informed when there is a data feed that is successfully completed. Where should the data go? Should it go to an FTP or an S3 bucket, et cetera? And then finally, your last step is deciding what columns and what metrics and what data sets are you actually going to have contained within these data feed files. And so this is obviously one of the more important items that you have to consider. And you also have, and you can see across the top there's a few different settings around changing the compression of gzip versus zip. Do you need to adjust the number of files? And I'll show you some examples shortly of what those different settings do, as well as finally whether you want to include the manifest file. And then of course you can always just simply download the list of columns as well. And so from here, we've got an example of what the file names will look like. And so this is going to be based on those settings that you are creating within the data feed. And again, like I said, we'll show you a couple of examples of these shortly. In addition, here's an example of what the manifest file looks like, and you have the option to say, you know what, I don't need the manifest file, or I do. This can be useful to ensure that you get the full set of data that you're expecting to get, where it defines what the file name is, the total number of records, etc. Next up, here's a very ugly looking hit data tab delimited file, and this is actually pulled using, for example, a terminal. Don't worry, that's not the ugly way that we'll be showing it today, and instead we'll actually be showing it within Excel or a tool like that. We also have this list of just simply the different columns that you'll have access to and a brief overview of them, along with the different field types that they're presented to you, a description of each of them, and some examples of how they'll be presented. I think this, and I have a feeling the next slide also, are going to be valuable enough and detailed enough that it's worth pushing into that community thread as well. And of course, if you have questions on any of this, don't hesitate to ask. Then finally, here's a list of your event lookup, and this is something that'll be provided to you within your lookup data that you receive within the data feeds, and I'll show you this shortly. Now, once you receive those data feeds, our customers are using all sorts of different tools to take advantage of them. Jacob, why don't you walk us through some of those different tools and cloud technologies that are in use?
Would love to. So once your data has landed in your S3 bucket or on your server, here are some common tools that people use to continue the analysis. Hadoop is really good at if you have something that fits into a MapReduce framework and you have lots of repeated analyses and customization that needs to be built. This is a great tool for doing that at scale. Spark, in many ways, is taking over Hadoop. There's lots of overlap between the two, but Spark is a little bit stronger in terms of doing things in real time. So if you want to have a really quick turnaround time, Spark is a great option for that. The reason that it's able to run faster is because it does lots of things in memory, which does make it more hardware intensive. But if you're doing something like live stream, where you want to have one of those real-time dashboards, Spark plus live stream makes a really good combo of just getting that data as quickly as possible. Hive is also a really great tool to use in combination with your data feed. It's really neat in the sense that you can write, anyone who knows SQL can use Hive to write SQL queries against the raw data, the data that gets dumped from the data feeds. But what's really neat about it is that you don't have to write insert statements. So you create a table definition in Hive, and then you point the table definition to a specific directory in your file system, and then you just drop the data there, and that's basically equivalent to inserting it into the table, and you're ready to write SQL statements. So that makes it really, really easy to use. Pig also has lots of overlap with Hive it does have has some more advanced transformations and customizations that are not available with Hive. And if you don't know SQL, then perhaps you'll like to learn Pig Latin. That's the language that Pig uses. But if you already know SQL, then you might not want to learn a new query language. So these are common tools that people use in combination with data feeds. There's obviously many more, but these are just some good ones to be aware of. Eric? Oh, no, the next one here is mine. The next one, and then here after that, these are different cloud technologies that people use. Right now our data feeds do support AWS. Azure is in the pipeline. We're working on that. Stay tuned if you have your environment living on Azure, that will come. And Google Cloud Platform is also in the mix. We're constantly improving data feeds. AWS already supported. The other two will be coming eventually.
Great. So with that, we'd like to migrate on over to my browser where I'm going to actually show you some of the different steps that it takes in order to actually set up some of these data feeds. And then I'll also walk you through a few of the different files that are outputted directly from the data feed exports as well. And so as you can see here, I've just got everybody's favorite analysis workspace tool listed here. Let me maybe hide my bookmarks to make sure you've got plenty of room to look at the beautiful set of workspaces that I have available here. But at the top, the place that you can go to in order to access the data feeds UI that we've been talking about is within admin and then data feeds. So in order to get there, just go ahead and click that one and you'll instantly be brought to a screen very similar to the one that's pulling up now. It's possible that you may or may not already have access to some data feeds that have been created. Note that there's a number of different ways that you can easily filter. If there's one specific report suite that you need to focus on and you're trying to find that data feed, you can very easily find it. You can also filter by who the owner is or what the current status is. Maybe you only want to limit it to active, current statuses, etc. You have that ability. Now, in terms of those, that's really quite easy to find the different items. Now, once you've got a feed, you have the ability to simply just click a check mark and you can identify what the job history is. You can delete it, you can copy it, you can pause it. You've got all these different options there around how you can edit the data feed after the fact. Now keep in mind you also, of course, have the ability to switch on over to the jobs area. And here you're going to be able to see what are the most recent data feeds that have been created, what the current status is, the start time, completed time, the requested date, etc. All of these different items. As you can see, I've got a whole slew of feeds in here, and I promise not to walk you through every single one. So let's actually jump into one of them. So let's see, I'm going to just take a look at this very first feed that I've already created just so you can get a feel for what one previously set up for feed will actually look like. And as that's loading up here, remember that there's a few things that you're going to want to have ready and available to you once you're ready to set up your data feed. Most importantly, you need to think about where you're going to send that data. And so as you can see, there's kind of a limited set of features that I can adjust after I've already hit save on my feed. So you want to be proactive with properly setting up your feed the first go around, unless there's some small changes that you need to make. First of all, you've got the name, your report suite, who to email when it's complete, your interval, whether there should be any delay in the processing, your start and end dates. Most of those are actually grayed out, as you can see, so not available to be edited later. Similarly, you've got destination decisions to be made. This is where you can choose S3 as your output. You define your bucket, your path, your access key, and your secret key. If there's one thing that I've learned by playing around a whole bunch with these S3 buckets is do not ever lose your secret key. That's not something that you should ever have the opportunity to lose. So keep an eye on that one. And then finally at the bottom you've got your data column definitions. So those are different things that you can edit. Let's actually create a new one. So when I click Add here, I've got a blank slate to deal with. So we're just going to simply create a new feed name here, and we're going to call this the Analytics Tuesday feed. And then from there, I've just got to simply select my report suite. We've got the Adobe Analytics Challenge going on right now, where we have college and graduate students competing to win almost $60,000 or over $60,000 worth of cash prizes to analyze some data from MGM Resorts. We're capturing data based on what's happening on AdobeAnalyticsChallenge.com. And this is the report suite that's capturing it. And so if I wanted to set up a data feed based on that report suite, I could just simply say, well, I also want to be emailed when it's complete, so I'll enter my email address. And then I have to make a decision about what my interval is. Think of this almost as the granularity of your data. How often do you want to receive the data feeds? Do you need it hourly, or is daily good enough? You also have some decisions around the delay processing. And actually, Jacob, I'm not sure if you have a good use case for why you would want to delay the processing here of your feeds. I'm not sure if that's more on the delaying for the Adobe side or delaying for the receiving side. Do you have a feel for that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to explain that. So that has to do, if you're with mobile applications, some mobile apps are still tagged, but if they're not connected to the internet, then the data won't upload to Adobe Analytics until later once it reconnects. So if you apply a delay, then you give more time for that mobile device to reconnect to the internet, and then your data is a little bit more complete, and you won't have, there's no need to reprocess it. So that's just a little feature there for mobile app tracking, for mobile tracking.
That's great. So for that offline tracking feature of apps, really, really useful feature there.
Exactly.
Since we don't have any app data coming in here, we don't have to worry about any processing delays. But of course, if we did, we could choose to delay it as much as up to 2 hours. Now, from here, the next step that we have to choose is what our start and end dates are. You can see when I select them, it's going to look very similar to the calendar within Analysis Workspace. Maybe for this one, I want it to start today. I could even, if I wanted to, I could go back in time. I could say start with September 1st and go all the way through the 3rd, which is the date, the final date of the Analytics Challenge. Hit apply, and automatically will, once I hit save on this data feed, I'll start getting that historical data as well as data going forward as each hour is completed. If I didn't have an end date, I can select this checkbox, and I'll say just continuously keep sending me the data, keep sending me it until I hit pause within the interface. Next up, I've got a fun decision to make, is what is my destination for these data feeds? I've got FTP, I've got SFTP, so it's my secure FTP, and then finally I have Amazon S3 as well. The one that we're seeing getting used, we're seeing a nice kind of breakout of all three of these, but the one that I personally find to be the most confusing, or maybe the least common by customers in terms of their familiarity, is the S3 bucket. And so because of that, I've actually pulled up my S3 console over here so you can get a feel for it. If you've never logged into S3 before or into Amazon Web Services, it's actually free to log in and create an account and create a bucket. And I think there's even like a limit of the amount of data that you're able to capture in there at a very limited or almost a free tier. And so what you'll want to do is just simply create a bucket. It's very easy to do it within S3, within Amazon here. So you can go ahead and create your bucket. You give it a name. You can copy some settings, set some properties, and within a couple of seconds, you've got your new bucket created. And then you just simply take that bucket name. So I can see it's Matisoff. That's not Microsoft. It's Matisoff. And I can click my bucket, take my bucket name here, Matisoff, and I drop it right in here. And all I need to do from there is then decide, well, what's my path going to be? And think of path as a folder within your bucket. The one thing to be aware of is the way that this tool works within data feeds, is you need the path to be an original name from the first time you set up the data feed. So if I were going to try to send this to daily export, for example, that actually wouldn't work well within the data feeds UI. Instead, I want to give it a new unique name. So I could call it my Analytics Tuesdays path. If I wanted to, I could, of course, append dynamically the report suite ID to the end of the path as well. Then, of course, the last steps are, well, what's your login information? What's your password? What's your access key and secret key in order to access this bucket and send data to it? So you just simply capture that information as you're setting up your Amazon S3 setups. Now, that's made available, if I remember correctly, within the AWS toolset. If you can't find it, I'll see if I can put the right knowledge base article in the community thread. But it's really quite easy to set up an access key and capture the secret key. But like I mentioned, don't lose that secret key, otherwise you'll have to create a new one. You'll never be able to recapture that secret key again. So once you've made those decisions, then you've got some fun things to do. Well, we can take a quick second and consider, well, what if we were entering FTP or SFTP here? It's very similar concepts. You're just simply entering the host, the path, your username, your RSA key for SFTP, or your password for FTP. Very, very similar concept. Now the fun stuff is what's going on down here below, which is your data column definitions. And so what we've got is a list of every single data column that's available to you to have pulled into a data feed. Now you can very easily just kind of click and drag and add these one by one if you want. If maybe you only want these 3, then you'll only get those 3 within the data feed. But if I know our customers want everything. And before you go ahead and click on the blue button and say add all, that adds every single column into your data feed, you also may want to take a look at the different templates that we have here. And so these may actually be helpful for you to give you a feel for, well, what are the different ways in which other folks are actually exporting data there. But just for the sake of fun, why not? Let's add them all. And once we've got all of our columns added here, then we've got some decisions around how we actually want this data to be formatted. So the first thing that I like to do is actually download the CSV. And when I do that, if I can click it, there we go, I'll get a list of each of the different columns that are going to be populated, the column names populated by my data feed. This is really important because we've purposefully not included the column names in the data feed exports to make it easier to apply the T and ETL to transpose the different data feeds together. So this is really important for the first time that you're actually pulling data in there. So in addition to that CSV, then you've got some decisions to make. Is it gzip or zip? And whoever's going to be owning those ETL processes, it's really important to make sure that they're aware of what the compression format is going to be. Then you've got some packaging decisions. Do you want everything in a single file, or do you want multiple files to be exported? And I'll show you just in a second what those differences look like. Actually, let's take a look. So we've got multiple files. And so what you can see I set up here is I said here's a zip with a single file. Now if I take a look at one, we can see here's 2017, September 22nd, and we've got, this is my manifest file, this TXT file, and then this zip file contains every single thing that is included within my data feed. In fact, I've already downloaded this over here, and if I take a look at my zip file, so my zip file, oh, that's multiple files, we've got single file. So my single file, all that was presented was that text file. The text file is my manifest. Talked about that earlier. And then I've got my zip file, which when decompressed or uncompressed, it gives you these items, all these different files. The one that has all the goodies in there is going to be the hit data file. And so your hit data TSV is going to be all of those different columns of data that you've chosen to export, broken out by each of these different columns. Now, as I mentioned, you may notice that I don't actually have column headers here. So if I were to actually insert a row, if I wanted to, and if I found it valuable, I can actually copy those and choose to paste the transposed columns here. And then I can see all of these different items listed. So I can see, for example, we can see the carrier is Verizon, the channel, the click actions. All of these different items are available within my data feed, all of the ones that I've selected. And so that can be really valuable just to validate that the data you're getting is the data that you're expecting. But like I said, normally you're not going to have that row in there whenever you hit that export. So super useful way to take advantage of the combination of that CSV that we downloaded over here and the single file of the zip files. So what are all these other files? What are all these other tab delimited files that you're looking at that come within your zip file? So let's open one up. Let's take a look at browser TSV. Actually, I may have selected the largest one, didn't I, Eric? Oh, well. Hopefully my MacBook Pro can handle it, and it does. All right. So what this is very simply, it's a lookup table for all the different browsers that we're seeing over here. So you can see here we've got a browser listed as 717426878. If I were to take that and use this lookup file, then we can see that's actually Safari 10. And so that's the way that we've organized things, is essentially we have your hit data, which is in your tab delimited file, and then you've got all of these other items that are your lookup files. And so it's really important to understand how that's broken out. And this is a really easy way to take advantage of all the data that's provided to you while similarly decreasing the size of that hit data file. Note that I've also got an event TSV here, and this is where all the different event level items, so purchases and product views and your custom events, that's where the lookup table for that exists as well. And so it's good to know each of these different items exist when it comes to your lookup tables. So with that, we've got our single file focused set of packaging type. What's the difference between that and multiple files? Not all that much, to be perfectly frank. One differentiator, and you can see here I still have my manifest file. That's because for this export I still selected over here, I've still said manifest file. If I said no file, then that TXT file, that manifest file, would not be included. But the important thing is thinking about, well, what's the difference between single file and multiple files? And the big differentiator is, where does your hit data live? Your hit data within single file is a part of your zip file here. So it's all combined with all your lookup files. Whereas if we were to take a look at the multiple manifest zip, then we can see for the 22nd, 2017, September 22nd, we have one zip file, two zip file, three zip files. We've got lots of different files all associated with them. And all of those are going to be different within, or differentiated within your multiple file areas. And so you've got your lookup table, first of all, and then if we take a look at just simply one of them, then your hit data is going to be separated out there. So it's oh, I'm sorry. You know what, I was just thinking about, what could these differences be? These are different dates, actually. So that's why we're seeing multiple within a single day, or different hours. So we're seeing different hours within that single day. But when we actually dig into that zip file, if we scroll on down, then we can see there's also lookup data is separated from the hit data. And so that's going to be your differentiator there, is we've got hit data is provided in one zip, lookup data is provided in a different zip, and then of course the manifest file. Those are those three exports that you'd get per hour or per day based on your granularity. Now finally, we've already talked about the manifest file, the packaging type, and the compression format. That's really everything there is when it comes to the data feed interface. And let me go ahead and hit cancel here so we don't actually create a new one. But keep in mind that once again, you do have the ability to click this check mark, and if there's one in particular that I wanted to take a look at, well, let's understand the job history for this one. How is it going? When did it start? What are we waiting for? So there's one just literally a few minutes ago that we're waiting for the export. It's currently in progress for the 1 o'clock time frame, so about 45 minutes ago. And then we can see all the different other completed hourly items and hourly data feeds, the completion time, and the requested date. And so I think that that's really all there is when it comes to the data feed interface. And I'd like to switch on over and see if we've got any other questions that we haven't been able to answer. So I'm going to hit pause on my screen and check out the Q&A pods, and feel free to ask your questions here.
Hey, Eric, I'll just add one quick thing on creating those feeds. When it comes to defining the directory of where the data gets delivered, you can have data go to an existing directory. However, the way it works on the back end is that it needs to ensure that there are not two feeds that are pointing to the same destination, because that's what can cause problems. So this is kind of a common gotcha that some customers, that has caused some troubles for customers just to be aware of, is that even if you have an old feed that's inactive and you're not using it anymore, if it's pointing to a directory, then that will still be flagged as a conflict, and then when you try to create a feed, it'll throw an error. So if you have a specific directory where you want to drop off your data, you have two, and it's being occupied by an old feed, you have two options. Option number one is you just go back to the old feed and update it and start it off again, or you go or you, with your new feed, you just select a completely new directory where there's not going to be any conflicts.
Great. Thank you for clarifying that, Jacob. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And so we've got just a few more questions coming in. Thank you, everyone, for asking and participating. Let's see. Jacob, I'm not sure if you've been able to take a look at them as well. We have a question on how often the lookup tables change. Is that something that you can speak to, Jacob?
How often do the lookup tables change? Those lookup tables do change periodically, every once in a while when we need a new column added, but it's not something that should be happening all the time. We can look into that and get back with you, but usually there's a couple of changes a year.
Yeah, if you think about the content that's within them, taking a look at browsers and search engines, and actually let me go back and resume sharing my screen here. If we take a look at some of the different items that are inclusive within these, browsers are something that simply we have to stay on top of. As new browser versions are released, we need to make sure that we've got a lookup table aligned with them. Same thing with, well, countries probably isn't something that changes all that often, but there's some parts of the world where countries are changing, so that's something that we keep an eye on. Same thing with operating systems and search engines. So it is something that's definitely worth identifying, is in keeping an eye on those lookup tables. I'm not sure if we have a best practice, but if we do have a best practice for how often those lookup tables should be analyzed and incorporated, we'll certainly share that. If it's something that you're looking to build from scratch, my recommendation would be why not have a check for those lookup tables every time you're doing an import, since you are getting those lookup tables every single time you get an import too. So there's certainly no harm in being being proactive with that data check. Really good question.
I also see a question I'll read the question off. It says, can you access the files in the S3 via DataViz tools? And that there are other analytics tools that do have integration built with S3. I believe that Tableau has an integration. That's one that I'm aware of, and I'm sure that there are others as well.
That's great, thanks. Let's see, taking a look through a few different questions here. Got a nice comment asking to focus on the API in an upcoming webinar, and Robert, thank you for that feedback. We'll be switching over to the exit polls in just a minute, so would love to receive that feedback there as well. And let's see if we start at the top. So here's a good question on, once we have all the data in our S3 bucket, how do I then report on something simple as page views? And Jacob, that may be a really good question for you to kind of dig into a little more granularly than I would be able to. And I can certainly pop open a hit data file so you can get a feel for it. Actually, I think I still have that one that had the column names in there.
But yeah, I'll share my thoughts on that one. Really the purpose of data feeds is just to give you the raw hit data. So really there are many different ways that you can report on that. You can sum it up. Really, since it's just the raw data, you have to build your own, either by using a different analytics tool, perhaps, as I mentioned, Tableau or QuickView, or if you want to write Python scripts, or if you want to use something like Pig or Hive, which were mentioned earlier in the webinar. There are many different tools for analyzing that data, and it's really up to you to either choose one of those existing analytics tools or to write your own custom visualization software, maybe using something like Python or something else like that. Basically, in a nutshell, it's up to you how to visualize and report on that.
That's great. So I'm just kind of slowly, or maybe quickly, scrolling through some of the different columns that you're able to see here around the different variables and the different columns that are populated. So you're able to see each of the different props. You're able to see evars. You're able to see the post-evars. Post-evar means it's post-processing after we've applied that attribution there. You're able to see the visitor ID broken out into a high and a low ID. When you combine those two, then you're able to identify the full visitor ID of those consumers. You see each of your different props, for example, here. You can see your referring domains, your referrer, your resolution, all of these different items. Then we start to get into your search engines using that lookup table that we were looking at earlier. Let's see, then we get really intricate in terms of the statistical server that's used, the timing of the server, all of these different items that you'll want to be aware of. Your user agent is really useful to capture here. The username that's passed in, all of these different items. So like I said, super, super granular, and then as Jacob mentioned, it can be really, really up to you how you're actually going to combine all this data together in order to create the use cases that we were talking about earlier.
Here's another question I'll read off. It says, what is the difference between exporting data using data feed versus data warehouse? And Eric, you correct me if I'm wrong on this one, but data feeds is raw data, and data warehouse can have some additional processing and aggregation applied to it that you go and you build out in data warehouse. Is that correct, Eric?
That's right. So that's a good way to think about it, is that a data feed is going to be at the absolute most granular level. Think of each row of these as its own server call. That's a server call. That's a server call. That's a server call. That's a server call. And so you could literally take this same data and recreate any of the reports from the absolute most granular set of data that you see within any other Adobe Analytics tool. Data warehouse is going to be a few levels up from that. Data warehouse, the most granular that you can get is going to be at the cookie or the visitor ID level. So already that means that within a single visit, multiple hits that align to a single visitor are going to be aggregated and consolidated into a single row. And so that's going to be a big differentiator for you, is at what granularity do you actually need your data to be, and that will probably help define which of the options that you have at your disposal to take advantage of. So
here's
we're
another
at about,
question.
Yep.
Oh, I'll take one more question here. Is it possible to use data feeds data with Adobe Campaign for remarketing? And yes, this absolutely, many of our customers are using Adobe Analytics with a data feed in combination with Adobe Campaign. That is a very common use case. One of our big goals that in terms of improving our product is to tighten the integration between these products. So right now, using data feeds is a way that many customers are building out that integration. If you want help, our engineering services department, they have consulting services that can help you with this. They used to be called engineering services. They're just now rebranding to the engineering architects, and they help customers build these integrations. And as we continue to develop our platform, these integrations will continue to tighten out of the box.
That's great. And so we're coming up to the top of the hour, so I'd like to switch on over to the exit polls. Thank you, Jacob, and thank you, everyone, for joining. I hope that everyone got to learn something or multiple things today. It was a pleasure talking with you all, and we look forward to seeing you on an upcoming webinar.